Okay, reminder that your cell anatomy labs are due on Monday and that your cell transport activities are due tomorrow. Okay, make sure you have those done. A number of people have been coming in and having me look them over, and the ones I've looked over are generally pretty good. So, okay, make sure you take advantage of everything that's available to you, especially those recordings. Okay, but also that you can have me look them over. Okay. I'm not available at lunch today because I have supervision, but I'm available after school today or before school tomorrow. Might be a little rushed since it's due at 8:35, but I'm still here. I still know how much time you'd have to make edits after that. All right, so what we're looking at here, lesson 8, transport in multicellular organisms. So we're now going to look at, instead of looking at transport within a cell, we're going to look at how some of those same processes, namely osmosis, okay, but also a little bit about diffusion, are used to transport materials on a larger scale, okay, in a multicellular organism. Now, obviously for an animal like ourselves, we have a system that uses energy and circulates stuff around our body. That would be our circulatory system, heart and blood vessels and stuff like that. Okay, that's completely different. Okay, that's not a cellular transport thing. That is a system of organs and tissues working together to do a job. Okay, we have to have that because we're large, we're active, okay, and all that kind of stuff. And so we have to transport materials as an animal in a bit different way. That doesn't mean that diffusion and osmosis and stuff like that still don't have a role to play. They certainly do, right? We're just going to be looking at this from the perspective of a plant as our multicellular organism because it doesn't have a circulatory system, but still has to transport materials over fairly large distances, especially when we're talking about using cellular transport processes. Okay? So we're going to look at how nutrients, water, sugar, minerals, okay, are transported in vascular plants. Okay? Vascular plants, guys, are plants that have tubes, okay, for transporting materials. So most plants you are familiar with are vascular plants. Okay? Anything that has a stem is a vascular plant. Even grass is a vascular plant. Okay? It's got veins running in the blades that transport material.
Would a Venus flytrap kind of could be considered that though as well?
Yep.
Okay.
It has a stem.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The things that would not be vascular plants would be mosses, liverworts, hornworts. Okay, things like that that are small, live right on the ground. Okay, don't have any tubes. All right, they would be the very primitive types of plants. Question? No. All right, and then we're going to look at the structure of vascular plants. Okay, what are some of these systems of tubes called? Okay, what do they transport? Stuff like that. And then look at the forces that are involved in moving them from place to place. Guys, every year, every semester, on the unit exam for this, I have a question that asks straight out memorization, what transports this material and how does it do it? Okay, so it's basically straight out of this lesson. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. Okay, so the big challenge for a plant is that the resources it requires are spatially separated. That means they're not in the same place. The dirt is where the water and nutrients are. But there's no light in the dirt. Okay? There's a little bit of carbon dioxide, but not enough to carry out photosynthesis. So a plant has to divide itself into two sections. Okay? Actually, three sections. It has to divide itself into the part of it that acquires water and nutrients. That would be the roots. Okay? There's the part of it that gathers sunlight and carries out photosynthesis. That would be the leaves. And then there's got to be a system that, or a part that connects the two and exchanges the materials so that each one can continue to carry out its job. Okay? The reason we have to have that is the roots can't carry out photosynthesis. Why not?
They're not exposed to light.
Yeah, they're in the dark. Okay? Similarly, the leaves cannot absorb water. They're covered by a waxy cuticle, as we learned yesterday. Okay? So they have to be supplied with water by the roots. So the roots can't carry out photosynthesis. They're supplied with sugar by the leaves. The leaves can't get their own water. They're supplied it by the roots. So they have to basically have this system of trade that goes back and forth between them, and that's what the stem is for. Okay? It supports the leaves and transports the materials back and forth. Now, if you're transporting one material up and another material down, can you use the same tubes for that? No. Okay, that's like having a one-lane highway, okay, that serves traffic north and south. It's not going to end well. Okay, you can't have materials going different directions in the same tube. Okay, that's not going to work. So there's a system of tubes for moving water and a system of tubes for moving the sugars that are produced by the leaves. Okay, so there's a lot of different adaptations that plants have come up with to help deal with the fact that their resources are in different places. Okay, things that crawl. Okay, strawberries, raspberries. Okay, things like that. That you know, they just kind of suddenly appear in another place. Like you planted the plant over here, but then a little while later, there's another one poking up like 6 feet away. Okay, especially with raspberries.
Yeah.
Okay, like if you have raspberries, they end up everywhere. They grow up in the middle of your lawn. Okay, even though the plants you planted are 10 feet from them. Okay, and strawberries will do the same thing. They'll put out a little crawler, which is just like it just looks like a stem. And if it touches the ground in another place, it'll actually start growing another plant there. Okay, it puts out what's called a stolon, okay, which you can see right here, which actually becomes a connective pipeline between the two parts. Okay, so if this part is mature and is using resources very quickly, it may exhaust some of those resources where its roots are. Okay, having a smaller version over here allows them to kind of support each other through the stolon. Okay. Other plants will create in their roots places where they can store excess energy. Okay? These things are generally referred to as tubers. More specifically, potatoes are an example of a tuber. Okay? Or a cassava or a yam, okay? Anything like that, those are tubers. They are energy storage for the plant. Okay, so they know maybe that they're going to have a long winter where they're not going to be able to carry out photosynthesis, so they store energy in their root system, and then in the springtime when things get better, they actually draw sugar from the tuber in order to make new growth. You've maybe seen this happen if you ever accidentally forgot a potato in the pantry, and then you go in there one day and you're cleaning things out, and it looks like there's this kind of soft, squishy spider. Except it's this big, okay? Because it's got the sprouts coming off of it, okay? It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, okay? Draw energy from the potato, which at that point will be squishy, okay? Because it will be taking all the starch that was in the potato and converting it into sugar to power the growth of the sprouts, which are trying to get to the light, okay? So they're growing desperately, trying to find a light source. They're usually kind of a purplish green color, okay? Trying to find light. If they get to the light, you'll even get leaves. Okay, I only know this because I left one really like 6 months one time. It really got going. Okay, and so yeah, they'll grow their own leaves and everything, but they'll die out because they don't ever get to a reliable light source before they exhaust the energy supply that's in the potato itself. All right, so a potato has got a lot of energy in it. Okay, would you agree?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, it's full of starch. Starch is plant fat. Okay, it's how plants store their excess energy. Right, they store it as starch. Okay, how do we store excess energy? Lipids, fats. Okay, so our excess energy is fats. For a plant, it can be oils, but for most of them, it's going to be in the form of starches in some other part of the plant, usually in the roots. This is why if you want to plant potatoes, you go and you buy potatoes, cut them in half, throw them in the ground. Okay, and they'll grow from there. There's enough energy in that potato, okay, that they will grow again from there. And if you got a particularly good crop of potatoes the year before, okay, it's not a bad idea to preserve them, okay? Put them somewhere dry and dark so that they don't try to grow, okay? And then you can use them to grow a new set, genetically identical, because you're actually essentially cloning them. You're taking the plant from last year and just regrowing it, okay, with what it made. All right, is that making sense? All right, and then other ways plants can store energy, if you see like things like onions, okay, they actually store their energy not so much as starch, but as sugar in the base of the leaf, which is why onions tend to be kind of sweet. Okay, I mean, they're first off like oniony and make you cry and tell a sad story. But okay, they also have a lot of sugar in there, and they can use that to grow the next year, which is why you can also plant onions with the bulb, okay, which is like essentially a dehydrated onion. Put it in the ground, and it'll come back and it'll grow from there faster than it will from the seed. All right, so the plant is divided up into, okay, roots, subterranean root system, okay, that absorbs water and minerals, and an aerial shoot system of stems and leaves that make food. So we essentially consider this to be three parts: the roots, the stem, and the leaves. Each one has a specific job. Okay, everybody okay with that one? All right, so an important adaptation of terrestrial plants, and that's all we're talking about. Terrestrial means the ones that live on land, okay? We're not talking about aquatic plants because they're completely different, okay? Their aquatic plants do not have tubes, they're not vascular because they are surrounded by water, okay? The water supports them, so they work completely different. We're only looking at terrestrial plants here, okay? One of the big terrestrial adaptations of vascular plants is something called lignin. Okay, and lignin is a hard material, a type of protein really, okay, that's embedded in the cell walls that functions in support, okay? Lignin is like mortar. Okay? Has anyone ever laid bricks? No one's ever laid bricks, and it's not something people do too often anymore, you know? Yeah. Okay, so when you lay bricks, okay, if you're putting in bricks, you put the bricks down, but you put like cement in between them. It's called mortar, okay? And so you put it in between them, and then that sticks them together. So if you've ever looked at a brick, okay, hopefully you've seen a brick or even a cinder block, okay? But they've got holes. Smaller bricks have 3 small holes. Cinder blocks have like 2 big holes, right? And kind of like that, okay? So the mortar goes into those holes and then hardens, essentially making the 2 bricks one solid object, okay? Cementing them together. Everybody with me on that? Okay, so that's how lignin works. Lignin takes 2 plant cells, okay, and essentially cements them together. And it hardens. So it's not like green fleshy plant material, it's wood. Okay? This is how the trunk of a tree or anything that's got a hard woody stem, okay, is going to come about. It's from this lignin that cements the cell walls together. Okay? And even after those particular cells die, which does happen, they still remain strong. All right? Everyone follow me on that? Okay? Because the trunk of a tree, actually very little of the trunk of the tree is actually like actively growing and alive. Most of it is dead. Okay? It's old growth. That's why trees make rings. Okay? The ring represents where the outside living part of the tree was each year it grew. Okay? And they can actually tell people a lot about the tree. So if a tree is cut down, okay, they can actually study the rings and they can tell a lot about climate and weather and pollutants. Okay? Really old trees can even tell you when you had El Nino years, or when you had events like if we know a volcano erupted in 1685, okay, and this tree is that old, you can actually see the effect of that, and that it didn't grow very much that year because it was colder because of all the ash, okay, that was in the air. It didn't get as much sun, didn't grow as much. Like they can actually track all of that in really old trees. Okay, so lignin, super important. That's what makes the hard parts of trees, the wood-like parts of trees. It's also important for the protection of certain types of seeds. Okay, there's lignin in pine cones, in nuts, okay, things like that that protect a seed. It's hard, okay, and serves that protective function. Okay. All right, questions there? Okay, so lignin is an important adaptation. Okay, why is lignin so important? Why is it important for plants to be able to get tall? Right. It's competition. Plants compete for resources. Light is the very important resource. Getting taller allows you to get more of it. All right. If you are short, then you're going to be shaded out by other things, and you'd better be tolerant of that. Generally, the plants that grow on the forest floor in the shade are tolerant of shade, and in fact don't like to be in direct sunlight. All right. So, adaptations of vascular plants, Turgor pressure. So we talked about lignin supporting the shape of a plant, but Turgor pressure and cell walls is also really important, and we talked about this already. I showed you the video of that plant recovering, okay, from being wilted. Okay, its water vacuoles filled back up, and you could see the effect of that increasing Turgor pressure, okay, as the plant just started to kind of come back up, and the leaves started to face the light again. Right, all that kind of stuff. So Turgor pressure is the pressure of water in the water vacuoles, okay, and it pushes against the cell walls. That's fine for a plant like this, right, or like that one right there that we're going to be cutting up on Monday for our lab, okay. All right, so it's good to support. It can support a plant like this because this plant's never going to get very what? No, it's never going to get very big. Right? It's a crawling plant. It's not a tall plant. Right? It just spreads out. For a plant that's going to grow tall and maybe have to support a large flower or a big tree, okay, then this Turgor pressure and cell walls not going to be enough to support that. There's kind of an upper limit to a fleshy green plant's size. Okay? A couple of feet tops. Then it's got to start making lignin to support the extra weight, okay, and balance it as well. Okay? I mean, we've all seen what happens to trees in the wind, right? They're actually, even though they're very strong and rigid, they're also quite flexible. Okay? They can sway a lot. If you've ever seen a palm tree in a hurricane, okay, like just watch on the Weather Network when they show the hurricane videos, like a palm tree can like pretty much bend right down to the ground on either side, okay? But it's also very, very strong.
What would be like the upside of flowers on a plant? Because like, I don't know, if you think about it, we constantly pluck the flowers to get their flower. Well, I don't know. Sorry, I'm wording this terribly. But, like,
Why does the plant have flowers?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much what's so great about having flowers.
The plant is the flower is the reproductive organ of the plant. Okay? So in the flower, at the base of the flower is the ovary. Okay? And the place where the pollen is, on the top, pollen contains the plant sperm. Right? So when a bug comes in, lands on the flower, the pollen falls on it, right? And then it carries it to another flower, and then that pollen from that flower fertilizes the other flower, and that's what creates the fruit. So the flower becomes the fruit once it's fertilized. Yeah?
Okay, yeah, sorry.
So
No, it's okay. It's a good question.
Each plant, they have like what, like Turgor pressure and water vacuoles and lignin, like.
Not all plants have lignin. All plants use Turgor pressure and water vacuoles and cell walls because they're going to have a leafy part, right? All plants are going to have some leafy, fleshy part. But the plants that have to get tall and support foliage that's way up in the air are going to have the lignin. Plants like this one here that are more along the ground kind of plants are just going to have the water vacuoles and cell walls. Okay? So this diagram here is kind of showing what happens to the plant as it loses water. All right, so in this first picture here on the top, okay, we've got that the water vacuoles are quite full. They're pushing against the cell wall and supporting the plant. It's rigid and upright. Okay, as the plant becomes dehydrated, okay, salts will begin to build up outside of the cell as water evaporates. Okay, and that's going to start to draw water out of the water vacuoles, okay, simply by osmosis. And as that happens, the water vacuoles shrink, and what eventually happens is the cell membrane will actually pull away from the cell wall, causing the plant to just wilt and fall over. Right? We can still recover that plant. Okay? If we water it, it'll come back. Okay? Those water vacuoles will fill back up, okay? Because water will then rush into the cells as a result of osmosis, because the tissue around will fill with water. Okay? And that process will reverse itself, and the plant can recover from there. Everybody all right with that? Okay. Now notice I did say water vacuoles, and in these pictures there's more than one, and in most plants that's the case. Okay. Most of the time there's more than one single large water vacuole. There's usually several large vacuoles in a plant cell. Okay. Everybody good with that? Right. So, what's the job of the roots? Okay. Well, the roots have a couple of jobs. Number one job is obviously to acquire water and nutrients from the soil that the plant is growing from. also an anchor. Okay? They keep the plant where it is. They also help to prevent soil erosion. Okay? Not that that's a purpose of them, but it's something that they do. Okay? If you have an area that's covered in grass and an area right beside it that's just dirt and it rains really heavy, what happens to the area that's just dirt?
It starts flowing like a river down your sidewalk.
Exactly, it starts flowing like a river down your side. Have you ever gone through a new neighborhood where not everybody has their landscaping done? Okay, they've got those things around the storm drains, the big foam circles. Okay, that's to filter out all the dirt that's going to wash into the rain sewer. Okay, because there's yards that are not done. Okay, there's lots of soil that can easily wash away because there's no plant roots to hold it in place. Making sense? Okay, so the plant roots hold things in place, they anchor them, they acquire water and nutrients. Okay, but there's different kinds of roots. There are tap roots and there are fibrous roots. Okay, each one has advantages and disadvantages. There's no one that's better than the other. In fact, you can find both types of roots in plants growing right beside each other in the same place. Okay. So, what are some plants that have tap roots?
Dandelions?
Dandelions, yeah. If you've ever tried to pull a dandelion, dandelions have tap roots. Okay, lots of times you break them off and you can just see that big annoying white root that you know is going to grow back. Okay. Carrot's a taproot. Turnips, beets, parsnips, okay, anything like that. Those are all taproots. Canada thistle, okay. Now, make sure if you're pulling that out of the ground, you're wearing gloves, okay. But it also has a taproot. Sometimes those can go 3 or 4 feet down, okay, on a mature Canada thistle. Okay. So yeah, they have taproots. Okay. The advantage of a taproot is the taproot goes very deep. If the soil at the surface becomes dry, then the plant still has access to water deeper down. Okay, so taproots also are often modified to store energy, right? Like a carrot or a turnip or a beet. Okay, they're an energy storage thing, like kind of like a potato, right? So they can store energy there. Which one would be better at holding a plant in place in a windstorm? Fibrous actually is a bit better. Okay? Fibrous roots are going to be better at holding something in a storm because they're gripping more dirt. Okay? A taproot can actually work itself right out. Okay? If you've got like a tall tree and it's got a taproot, which is why very few tall trees actually have taproots, okay? If the trunk of the tree is swaying back and forth, the bottom of the tree will pivot as well. And if it's a big long taproot, it'll just wiggle until it gets free and then it'll probably snap right off, okay? Or even come right out of the ground. But a fibrous root is reaching around everywhere, grabbing onto the ground and holding tightly and keeping the plants locked in place. You may. Which type of root do you think like a cactus would have?
The fibrous roots.
It actually has a fibrous root. And it's a very shallow fibrous root. So have you ever seen like the saguaro cactus like you see in Arizona? Okay, like it's on the Taco Time sign?
Yeah.
Okay? They have a fibrous root system that only goes into the ground maybe a foot, but can spread out almost 50 meters from the plant when it's mature. Okay? Now that's counterintuitive because cacti grow in the desert and the soil's always dry. Why wouldn't they have a taproot that goes down really deep? Because the soil's really dry. Okay? It never rains enough to soak in and get wet really deep down into the ground. So you want to have your roots right at the surface. So then when it does rain, you can grab all of it right away and store it inside the cactus. The prickly pear? Yeah, prickly pear cactus. Yeah, they have a fibrous root as well. Okay, it's a lot like a dandelion's root. Like a dandelion's got the taproot, but it also has fibrous roots that go up to the side. It's well adapted. But the prickly pear is more fibrous. Okay, it might have a central root that goes maybe about this far. Okay? But yeah, they grow here because it is hot and dry here. Okay, this year would have been great for them. They're what? Really green, yeah. Because I mean, it was perfect conditions, really hot and really dry this year, okay, for cacti. So, now, can you eat cacti?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Okay, most cacti. Don't just go out and eat the plant. I'm not sure, but yeah, you can eat most of them. You just obviously have to be careful. Okay, you don't want to eat the spines, obviously, because those would hurt and get stuck in the roof of your mouth or your throat. Okay, which is of course what they're meant to do. Okay, it keeps animals from eating them, unless you're an antelope. Antelope will just eat the prickly pear cactus. Their mouth is like shoe leather. Okay, it's super tough. Okay, they can just clamp right down, the spines just break right off. Okay, and they can eat the prickly pear cactus.
Sorry, while we're on this topic, how would the owls be able to live in like those really big cactuses? Because like if they have to dig their way into it too, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, they go in between. Lots of birds will nest in a cactus because they can get in between the thorns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the thorns are really just there to keep big animals from eating the cactus. Smaller animals, yeah, they can work their way in between.
Yeah, yeah. So I was just wondering because if they have like the prickles, would they just like jam themselves in between and like eat through it?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
For sure. The other thing, guys, is that people get this idea, if I'm in the desert, I know cacti have got lots of water in them. They get this idea, if they stab a cactus, water comes out. It's not like that at all, okay? The cactus is very fleshy, so once you get through the hard outer skin of it, okay, there's a fleshy layer, almost like fruit on the inside, kind of like same consistency as like a unripe cantaloupe or unripe honeydew, kind of stiff like that, and bitter. Okay, so don't get the idea that, oh, this is gonna be great. I'm just gonna, no, it tastes bad. Okay, and there's a reason for that. Cacti don't want to be eaten. Okay, I mean, we're covered in thorns. Leave us alone. We also taste really bad. Don't eat us, kind of thing. Okay, it's just an adaptive thing for them. All right, so the fibrous roots, they can go kind of everywhere. Okay, they spread out, so they have access to more surface area. But they also often have little nodules on them that contain bacteria that can take nitrogen from the air and convert it into forms the plant can use. Because part of the nutrients that all plants want to absorb are nitrates and ammonium. That helps them make protein and amino acids. Okay, so that's actually how plants make protein, is through the process of absorbing nitrates and ammonium from the soil or from the air, okay, and allowing them to do that. Okay, so that's an important thing that they can do. Okay, stems. Purpose of the stem is to support the plant, transport nutrients from the roots to the leaves. Okay, the stem has to have a great deal of Turgor pressure in its cells and sufficient lignin in the cell walls if we're talking about a woody plant. Okay, all right. When you have a plant that's got this kind of stem, what happens if it gets eaten? Okay, so this is the same plant, left and right here. Okay, what they've done is they've removed the middle part. Okay, so they just had somebody cut this off right here. Yeah, grows more. Right? If you mow your lawn regularly, it gets thicker. Right? Because you cut the leaves back and then it grows from below to fill in. Okay? Same thing with a hedge. Right? If you've ever seen somebody or like been to a hedge maze or been past a house that has hedges on the sides, the plants that act like a fence. Okay? The way they get that, those start out as like two little sticks. Okay? The kind we usually have around here are called cotoneaster. Okay? And they start out as two little sticks. And over 20 years or so, if you keep trimming them, they keep growing from lower down and filling in. All right? So you let them get a little bit tall, then you cut them off and they fill in. And every year you trim them with a hedge trimmer and they grow from behind and make the plant thicker and thicker and thicker until it becomes effectively a wall. Okay? So prime example of that would be around the cemetery. Okay? So around the cemetery there are carriganas, okay? Hedge-type carriganas, and every year they trim those, okay? And they grow from a little bit back and they get thicker and thicker and thicker. All right, so main purpose of the stem is to support the foliage, okay, the photosynthetic parts of the plant, and to transport materials from leaves to roots and vice versa, roots to leaves. Okay. All right. Another picture of the layers of the leaf. You can. Okay. So we got the upper epidermis here that secretes the cuticle, Okay, the cuticle seals the leaf so the water can't get out, okay, but also means water can't get in. All right, so leaves cannot absorb water. Only the roots can do that. The leaves are covered in that waxy cuticle, no water gets in through the leaves. Then we have the palisade layer where we've got all those cells that are tightly packed and full of chloroplasts where the bulk of the photosynthesis occurs. Then below that is the spongy layer. Okay, you don't have to call it mesophyll, by the way, we just call it palisade layer, spongy layer. Okay, and we've got the cells that are irregularly shaped that create the spaces where carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen are going to get exchanged. In the lower epidermis, again, we have the waxy cuticle, but the lower epidermis contains the stomate, which is made up of those two guard cells whose shape changes based on how much water is in their vacuoles. Okay, remember that because that comes up over and over and over again. Okay, the leaves are the main photosynthetic organs of the plant. Sure, the stem, if it's green, is going to carry out some photosynthesis, but the bulk of the photosynthesis is done by the leaves. Okay, so leaves have veins. That's what you can see here. Okay, this kind of yellow part. Okay, it says veinlet. In the veinlet, there's two types of tubes. There's the tubes here on the outside. They transport sugar, and then the tubes on the inside transport water. Right, so the inside layer transports the water up the plant. Okay, the outside layer transports the sugar back down to the roots. We'll talk about what those, what that looks like and what those are called in a minute. So the leaf is generally broken up, okay, into a blade, a stalk, and where the leaf attaches to the main part of the stem is called the petiole. I'm never going to ask you that, but okay, just so you know, okay, that's how the leaf is broken up: blade, the stalk, and the petiole. Okay, grass blades look different. Okay, obviously a blade of grass is just the blade of the leaf. There's no petiole because there's no branch. Okay, there's kind of a short stem, but there's no, or stalk, sorry, but there's no petiole.
Petiole, okay,
Yep.
goes up.
All right, so job of the leaves, carry out photosynthesis. Now there's different kinds of leaves. Most plants have this type of leaf that we've looked at, the C3 leaf. Cacti don't have leaves. In fact, well actually they do, but that's their thorns. Okay? Their leaves have evolved to become non-photosynthetic and protective only. So the large fleshy part of the cacti does the bulk of the photosynthesis, but it's set up differently, right? There's these big open spaces, which is the fleshy part that kind of holds the water. Okay, their stomates are made up of 4 types of cells. So you've got the regular guard cells with these other like secondary guard cells in the middle, and then the spongy layer and the palisade layer wrap around the veins. All of this helps to conserve water. So it's just adaptive for water. I'm never going to ask you to label a C4 or CAM leaf ever. Okay, we're going to be looking at what most plants have.
Okay. I got 2 questions.
Okay.
So one, like, what's the purpose of a cactus? Because like normal plants, they can like carbon dioxide and oxygen and stuff. So like, what do cactuses do?
Same thing.
Oh, do they?
Cactus is still a plant,
Mhm.
right? So it's still carrying out photosynthesis. It's still releasing oxygen, taking in carbon dioxide. So they still do that.
Oh, already.
Yeah.
And how is it possible for them to like get spliced? Is that just like something in their DNA that allows them to do that?
It's just what they've evolved over time.
Oh, okay.
Not having leaves means less places where water evaporates from, okay? Less exposure to the sun, right? I mean, the limiting factor for a cactus is not sunlight,
Yeah.
right? The limiting factor for a cactus is water. So they don't need a whole bunch of leaves, surface area for photosynthesis. They don't need that.
Oh,
But they
okay.
do need to protect themselves because any wound represents a place where water is going to be lost.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just wondering, because like, do their needles just like, are they like the shark teeth kind of, how they just like push out the next ones and come from underneath, or do they just like slowly grow off?
That I don't know. I think they just break, if one breaks off, it doesn't really grow back. New ones will grow, right? That's why a bird can, if they can break one off, they can make a hole, right? Like the owl you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions on the leaves? Good with the leaves, okay. All right. let's take a 5-minute break here, and then we're going to come back and talk about how water and sugar are transported. If you're leaving the classroom, yeah, masks on, but hey, be quiet in the hallway. If you want to visit, stay here to do that. Okay? If you just need to go get a drink or use the bathroom, leave the class for that. Okay? Okay, so transport in plants is going to be accomplished through this diagram, so you're going to kind of want to follow with the steps in here. So the first step, we'll start down here in the roots with number 1. The first step is that water and minerals are being absorbed by the roots. Okay, this is kind of an osmotic process, right? There are solutes in the roots. They kind of build up in concentration. Okay, a little bit of active transport gets used to make solutes in high concentration. Okay, near the surface of the roots, so that water moves by osmosis in to balance it. Okay, so there's a little bit of active transport, but not much. It mostly happens passively. Okay, into the roots. Okay, now the water needs to move up through the stem. Okay, that means against gravity. How does the plant accomplish that? Polar nature of water is part of it. Well, that's polar nature of water. Again, that's the polar nature of water. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's got to be a force that's actually going to pull against gravity, that's going to be stronger than gravity, that's going to either push or pull the water up the plant. Keeping in mind that the plant expends no energy whatsoever to move this water. So it's not active transport. There's no pumps in the roots that are like squeezing and pushing the water up the plant. None of that. This is done by osmosis only. Okay? Osmosis provides a pulling force that originates in the leaves and acts through the polar nature of water all the way to the roots. Go on. Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Okay? Because these tubes are microscopic. Okay? So we're not looking like, when you cut down a tree, right, you don't see big tubes inside the tree. Okay? That's because the tubes have to be microscopic. They are depending on the polar nature of water, which are weak hydrogen bonds, to support the weight of the water and keep it from falling back down. Okay? So if I've got a tube that's this big in diameter, cohesion and adhesion can really only occur along the outer edges, which means I've got all this water in the middle that's unsupported basically, and it'll never sit there. Okay? The hydrogen bonds between this water molecule and this water molecule are not strong enough to support a column of water. It would have way too much weight and fall back down. So those tubes are really small. So to give you an idea, this line here is 100 micrometers. Okay, that line there's 100 micrometers. How big are all the little tubes? Some of them are bigger, some of them might be about 10 micrometers, but how big are all these ones?
Like 5.
Yeah, they're really small. Okay, like 5 micrometers, something like that. So the amount of water that's in any one tube is very small, but there's millions of tubes. So when it comes down to it, there's still lots of water in the stem or in the trunk of a tree, but it's divided up into smaller tubes where the hydrogen bonds are strong enough to support that column of water. Okay? Think about this. If you have 2 different straws, okay, so you got one of those like really skinny straws versus like a big giant slurpy straw, okay? Which one is easier to get moving?
Bigger
Smaller one. You hardly have to suck at all on a really thin straw to get the fluid to come up because there's not very much of it in there. But if you have a really big straw, you have a lot of water in that straw. So you have to create more suction to pull the extra weight of that extra water up.
Wouldn't it also kind of depend on like the viscosity of the liquid?
Yes, but it's always water for a plant,
Okay.
right? So
Like-
they don't have to worry about that part of it.
Hey, what about like maple trees though? Would they still somehow suck it up with
The maple part that you're thinking of, the syrupy part, is going down.
Oh, it's going down. Okay.
That's where the sugar is, right? So
Oh.
that's the part produced by the leaves.
I guess I was wondering if they like suck it up, would they have like a bigger tube? Because then, like, I find if I'm gonna have like a more thick liquid, then it'd be easier to get it through.
Phloem tubes and xylem tubes are the same size because phloem tubes that carry the sugar become xylem tubes as the plant grows.
Okay.
Okay, the thick sugary sap doesn't. I mean, it just goes because gravity pulls it. So there's nothing special about having to move thick sugary sap down the tree.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So we got those small xylem tubes, okay, that are carrying the water up the plant, and what's providing that force is water evaporating through the leaves. So as water evaporates through the leaves, it leaves the salts that were in it behind. Because when the plant absorbed water from the soil, it absorbed all the nutrients and all the solutes and everything else with it, and all that was transported up the tree. But when the water evaporates and turns into a gas, those solutes get left behind and salt builds up in the leaf. That's why the stomate closes, okay, throughout the day. But it's also what creates the osmotic pulling force that is present in the leaf. As those salts build up, water from way down here feels a pull towards the leaves because of all that salt. Okay? Now, again, there's the polar nature of water that's working in concert here. Osmosis creates the pull, but it's the polar nature of water that keeps the water together. Okay? The analogy we used back in chemistry was like a barrel of monkeys, right? With the hooked arms, and you can just hook them all together. Every molecule of water is hooked to the next one by a hydrogen bond, cohesion, okay, as it goes up the plant, and then there's adhesion between the water molecules and the inside of these xylem tubes. Because the xylem tubes are so small, there can be lots of adhesion and very few molecules that are left unsupported. All right, so that gets us to step 4. As water evaporates, photosynthesis is going on. Okay, so in the process of photosynthesis, we've got light energy, carbon dioxide coming in, being converted, oxygen being produced as a waste product, and sugar, which is our end goal if we're a plant, being produced. Okay, so that's photosynthesis there. 5 and 6, okay, are essentially the process of photosynthesis, exchange of gases and production of sugar. Now, the sugar needs to move back down the plant. Certainly the leaves use some of it, but it's the roots that really need it because they can't make it themselves. So the sugar begins to move down the tree or plant, okay? But it's moving in a separate set of tubes called phloem tubes. Okay? The phloem is what carries the sugar. Those tubes are exactly like xylem tubes, except every once in a while they have a plate. Okay? Essentially like a cell wall at the bottom of the tube, but it's full of holes. Okay? And what that does is it keeps crystals from forming. Because if a big sugar crystal forms in one of these phloem tubes, it could be, what could it do? It could clog it. So there's these plates at the bottom, or kind of breaking up the tubes as they go. If a crystal forms, it'll hit the plate, and the weight of the sugar above will crush it. Okay, and it won't ever let it get big enough to block the tube completely. Okay, and then the sugar will keep flowing. All right, the phloem is on the outside of the tree. That's why if you nick a tree with something, okay, sap, the thick sticky stuff, leaks out. Xylem sap is in the middle of the tree, and it's thin. It's just water, so it goes up really easily. Okay, you don't necessarily see that again because it's on the inside. And there's lots and lots of xylem tubes, each one carrying only a small amount of water. Okay, so the thick, sticky sap comes from the xylem. That's the stuff that's used to make sugar from a maple tree. Okay, but all plants have this phloem sap that's thick and sticky. Okay, and then the xylem sap is in the middle, and it's just water. Okay, it's just moving up the tree. All right, so our last step down here, okay, is the opposite of photosynthesis. This is the roots. Taking in oxygen, producing carbon dioxide, burning sugar. This is cellular respiration. Okay? Not just the roots, every part of the plant does that, but we're just showing it down there. All right, so these notes go with that diagram. Okay? Step 1, roots absorb water. 2, roots exchange gases. Okay? 3, water and minerals are transported up as xylem sap within the xylem. Okay? Transpiration is the evaporation of water. Okay? Leaves exchange gases. Sugar is produced by photosynthesis. Sugar is transported within the phloem in a solution called phloem sap to roots and other non-photosynthetic parts of the plant. Okay, so that all goes with that diagram there. Okay, so if we're looking at the cross section of a tree or plant of any kind, okay, as we said, the xylem is in the middle and the phloem is on the outside. So the actual living part of the stem or the trunk is the phloem. Right, that's where the sugary sap is. Okay, the cells that are in there are alive and they're getting their sugar. The cells that are on the inside, the xylem, are actually dead phloem tubes. As the plant grows, it grows by adding on to the outside. The plant doesn't grow from the center. If it did, it would constantly crack, right? And that doesn't happen. So a plant grows by adding a layer on the outside each time. Again, how the rings of a tree are formed. And that's the living part where the sugary sap is transported down. And that only requires gravity. Okay, gravity will do just fine. The plant doesn't need to expend any energy to move sugary phloem sap down to the roots.
What is like a knot in a tree? Is that just like cells that have
Yeah.
combined? Or?
Well, sometimes it's the result of a wound,
Yeah.
and the plant just kind of grows around it. Other times it can be a parasite that has caused the plant to kind of surround the parasite and kind of isolate it in the growth. There's lots of different things. It could be a branch that broke off and they just kind of grew around that. And stuff like that. There's lots of different things that can cause knots. But yeah, it is just like a weird growth of cells. It's almost like a tumor, except it's benign. Like a plant doesn't get like a cancerous tumor that becomes a knot. It's just usually where something has happened to it and it's kind of healed around. It's almost like a scar.
So it's possible for trees to be able to like choose where they grow. And like, okay, to an extent though, because you said like if there's a parasite, they can like grow around it to isolate it. So they
Choose what part of the tree
Yeah, yeah,
grows.
sorry.
Okay, I thought you were saying they could choose where, like a location to
Yeah.
grow
Oh,
in.
no.
Okay, yes. Plants will always grow where their resources are. So plants naturally grow towards the sun. It's called phototropism. We're going to learn about that tomorrow. Okay. Plants naturally grow up against gravity. And plants can also respond to touch positively or negatively. Some plants will like grab onto stuff, like peas will climb a fence. Ivy will climb a building. And other things will shy away from touch. So yes, they can control where they grow.
already.
Okay, so the two tissues are the phloem and the xylem. Okay, each transports material in different ways, and we need to know which and how. So the xylem transports water up the plant. Okay, that process involves osmosis, adhesion, and cohesion of water molecules. Right, so water evaporates from the leaves. The remaining solution in the xylem becomes more concentrated with salts, and that causes an osmotic pulling force that pulls the water up the plant. On Monday, we're going to do a lab on this. Okay, we're going to take these plants here, and we're going to cut them up. And then we're going to put them in food coloring water, and we're going to make note of where all of the water moves to. Okay, since the roots will be taken off of them, the idea is that we would prove that the force that pulls water is in the leaves and not the roots, and then that would confirm, okay, for us that if a plant can transport water without its roots on, that the pulling force is created in the leaves, and it is osmosis that's responsible for that, rather than some pumping action from the roots. Okay. So at a microscopic level, this is what's going on in the xylem. Okay, the tubes, okay, like we said, they're not very big. So we got individual water molecules in there. There's cohesion, or a hydrogen bond between water molecules. There's adhesion, or a hydrogen bond between the water molecules and the xylem tubes. Okay, and then there's the osmotic pulling force that's pulling up on this chain, okay, of water molecules pulling it up the tree. Okay. Questions on the xylem? Okay, so on a unit exam where there's a 6-mark question that says, identify the structures that carry water and sugar and explain how they work. Everyone's going to get 6 out of 6. Okay. All right, then the phloem. So the phloem transports the sugars that are synthesized by photosynthesis down the plant, okay, to the tissues that are not capable of making them themselves. Okay, down the plant. And all that is, so there's a little bit of osmosis, there's a little bit of diffusion, but this is mostly gravity. Don't need anything else. Gravity will pull everything back down. Gravity is always bringing you down. Okay? Always working against you. Stupid gravity.
Okay, see, this question has nothing to do with anything. But let's say,
Well, then why are we asking?
because like it kind of makes sense to me, but I want to know.
Okay.
So if let's say that we just wanted like to do the Martian and grow a plant in space, and that if you put it in the sun because it would be closer and stuff, and you got it like a little good container that has like the like the dirt and stuff in there, so it can grow perfectly, then would it be able to grow really tall because it has no gravity like pushing it down?
Plants that grow in zero gravity grow a lot different because plants on Earth, gravity is one of their stimuli that tells them which way light generally is. So in space, plants just grow randomly toward light.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so yeah, they tend to spread out, yeah, and kind of just go wherever the light is, that's where they go. And even on Earth, to an extent, plants only grow towards the light. Gravity assists them by telling them that way is up. Gravity only really becomes important if a plant gets pushed over. So you may have seen a tree that kind of is growing like this,
Oh yeah.
right? That usually means the tree was pushed over when it was small, and it could have kept going out this way and still got lots of light, but it would have fallen over. So what a plant does is it knows which way is up, and it'll start growing against gravity to try and rebalance itself. All right, I want you guys to answer those questions, and hopefully we'll get a chance to go through them. We still got 7 minutes, so maybe we will. Okay.